Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this April 4th, a very gloomy day here in Toronto. And please thank you for joining us in this month's session of the Creative Champions Network. Just going to give a second for Vanessa to join us. Great. And Alexandra, I'll leave the participant room to you to let everyone else in. I can see people are coming in slowly. All right. Hello again. My name is Michelle Young. I'm lead of the Creative Champions Network. I go by she, her pronouns. For a visual description, I am short female. I'm wearing a black top. I have shoulder length black hair and of Chinese heritage. I am second generation Canadian born and raised in Toronto. My parents are immigrants to this land, which has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land where I am zooming in from today is traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and the Huron-Wendat. I will slow down, Vanessa. I'm sorry. As a settler, I recognize that the role and responsibility to truth and reconciliation, and I am grateful to have this opportunity to live on this land and to share this space with all peoples, those Indigenous to Turtle Island and those from around the world. Welcome to our first online gathering of the season. I know that we are all joining from different spaces and places around Toronto today. And I'd like to acknowledge that long before we called our communities by our names like East York, where I live, and or like North York, for example, that this land has been traveled, cared for, and inhabited by generations of Indigenous people. I see many different faces and names in the participant list and this is our figurative audience today. And I want to remind you that reconciliation is a task that we must all work together towards. I urge you to become familiar with the trees and nations that cared for the land you now call home. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm just going to share a really cool resource that talks about our land and the traditional territories that it belonged to. Okay, so hold on, I'm going to close the chat. Okay, so today our topic is about what happens when people leave our organization. So for the first half of the session, I would like to ask that all participants remain on mute and with their cameras off. You may also select the feature hide non-video participants on your screen. There are several ways of doing it, and I usually do with the 3 dots in the top right of the square where there is no camera on, and select that. That will remove anyone that is not on camera, and it'll just provide a better viewing experience for you as well as everyone else. If you have questions for our panelists, please use the chat function. Michael Caldwell, one of our co-hosts, is keeping track of the questions that are coming up, and we will try to answer some of those if time permits at the end of the session. However, the second half of the session will include 1 or 2, depending on timing, breakout rooms for you to ask your questions directly to the panelists of that organization. At that time, I'll ask everyone to turn on their cameras and welcome everybody, and everyone can see each other's faces. For this session, as you know, we also have ASL interpretation provided by Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Services. Our interpreters, as you see right now on screen, is Vanessa, and Dean is also joining us today too. You may pin their videos if it's needed. Zoom also offers live captioning, so please click the double CC button at the bottom of your screen if that is needed. Okay, I see there's still more people coming in, but let's get started. So today our panelists include Ted and Christina from Generator, Joelle and Himanshu from Native Earth, and Allison and Heather from the Toronto Consort. Their bios are included on the second page of the resources that were distributed earlier. So please go there if you want to learn a little bit more about our speakers today. Now, planning for succession and leadership transition guarantees the stability and health of the arts or any arts organization. Yet arts leaders and board members are not necessarily prepared for what happens when people leave. If leadership transition requires an organization, backing up one sentence. Planning for transition not only ensures the continuity of an organization's mission and work, but having a process and plan in place prevents institutional memory loss and reduces risk. If leadership transitions require an organizational change or shift, and we must look inwards to identify internal needs before engaging externally. Leadership change is a key board responsibility. How are we preparing ourselves for this inevitable evolution? I hope to answer some of these questions that you may have today with our panelists. So at this time, I'd like to invite Joelle and Himanshu from Native Earth Performing Arts. Hello, Joelle, and hello, Himanshu. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So at Native Earth Performing Arts, over the last several years, there's both the artistic and administrative leaders who have been with the organization for quite a bit of time, sort of left, not necessarily abruptly, but it was time for them to move on. And I was wondering if you could speak about how the board managed sort of 2 consecutive changes back to back. And maybe perhaps, Joelle, you can start with your transition into the role as artistic director.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm Joelle Peters. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up in a place called Walpole Island First Nation, which is about 3.5 hours away from Toronto. But now, because of this job and the theater world, I work and live here. So how did I start? I have been with Native Earth for 7 years now, which is a strange, long amount of time, and it does not feel like that much time has passed. But here I am. I started in box office and front of house, and it allowed me the freedom to be able to go off for theater gigs, take time away to work on writing. And then last year, I took on an assistant directing and understudy gig in a show that we were co-producing with Soul Pepper. So I was busy doing that. And in the midst of it, Keith and Isaac left, really. Not at the same time again, but they had announced their leaving. And so it left a bit of an opening for who's going to be the AD of this company. So after a bit of thinking and conversations with Isaac Thomas, who was our managing director, we talked about me coming in as the interim, just because of my previous knowledge with the company and work with the company, my love and respect for Indigenous arts, and just so here I am. I never saw this being something I would jump into. It feels very early in like a career trajectory, but I'm trying it on for size. This is me putting an AD hat on.
And how has the board felt about, this decision? Clearly it was a collaborative decision. How were they in their appetite for doing this? Because I know a lot of times we kind of just revert back to what's always been done, do a search and move on and find somebody to replace somebody as quickly as possible. Do you or does Himanshu have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it felt like the board was trying to be thoughtful about their decision. They didn't want to just throw someone into it. And so that's partially why the interim title is there for me, but also that's pretty self-led because I'm seeing if it works for me and my artistic career. So the board has been really, really gracious and helpful, supportive in trying to find a balance and really backing us, Himanshu and I, in helping us figure all of this out, because it's pretty new for both of us.
Himanshu, do you want to add anything, or shall I go to the next question? But up to you.
No, I did want to say that the board were, again, just re-echoing, the board was very, very supportive of us, and they gave us, and they knew that we are coming from very different backgrounds. I was also patron services manager at Factory before coming in. The only experience I have in managing was my own independent theater company, which I run on the side. So to make this leap was going to take some time to learn and figure all of this out. And I'm completely new to Native Earth, so I have no connection to Native Earth apart from probably seeing a couple of shows and living in the neighborhood. So that was, they were very, very supportive. They understood that was going to take us at least a couple of years till we're actually settled in. So they gave us that freedom to just like relax, everything's fine. They created also a support circle for us where we could reach out to the arts community across GTA just to reach out to folks who have the experience to like share their knowledge with us. Yeah, and those support circles were really, really beneficial for us so far.
That's great. So it sounds like quite a collaborative approach, within the staff as well as with the board, and everyone sort of seems like an appetite for what's next and change and the continued evolution of the organization. Himanshu or Joelle, could you speak a little bit more about those support circles? I think that's something that I think lots of arts organizations aren't necessarily considering when they're thinking about a transition or a succession, is that they've replaced the person and they feel that the job is done, but it's an ongoing process. Could you speak a little bit more about that? And then also, I understand that through that, you're also able to restructure the organization to meet the current needs.
Yes, I think it was mostly created because the support circles were specifically for me because, as I mentioned, I had no background with the company. I didn't know what the kind of shows, apart from seeing a couple of shows, didn't know the structure of the company, and I'm still very, very new to the indigenous arts and trying to learn that simultaneously while picking up a job of this magnitude. The support circles was really, really helpful because that was able to help me understand the indigenous arts overall across Canada, and at the same time figuring out whether I'm balancing my budget so far. So far, so good, I guess. We'll know that. So in that way, the support circle was really, really beneficial. Same for Joelle stepping to this role, just getting the knowledge from folks that are experienced in that position to help us learn and guide us through this transition period was really, really helpful.
That's really, really great. I think that touches on, our first session in October around building an ecosystem, a web that supports the work at the organization. Thank you so much. I'm going to shift to another organization. So I'm going to welcome Toronto Consort, Alison and Heather to the screen. So I'll just give them a couple seconds to turn on their screens. Hi, Alison. And hi, Heather.
Hello.
Now, the Toronto Consort has also been going through some amazing changes over the last little while. And much of it has started before COVID, but I do think that COVID really requires us to examine things even further and how our organizations will continue doing the impactful work that we do in the community. So Heather or Alison, whoever would like to start first, I think what is most interesting with the Toronto Consort journey is how you've navigated and prepared for the retirement of, sort of the figurehead, the artistic director of David Follis after 28 years. We have lots of organizations that are founder-led or have had the same leadership. So what can we all learn as arts organizations as we transition and move in a different direction or planning for succession within our organizations?
Alison, you want to share first? Sure. Yeah, so I just say I'm Allison. I am a flutes player, and I have been with the organization for many years. And but it's great that you're asking about the transition from when David was artistic director. Um, I would have to say we've been very fortunate all the way along. I think basically in terms of the people that are involved with the organization at every level. So the musicians are a very collegial bunch of people. The staff has always been wonderful to work with, and the board has always been super supportive. So I really feel very lucky. I've been involved in a number of other organizations that were not so fortunate. And I think it's always important to be grateful anyway, and particularly in a case like this. I would also have to say that with David leaving, the one thing that was interesting, well, there were many things that were interesting about David, but one was that he was really very collegial and collaborative as an artistic director anyway. And I think that secretly that's what everybody wants in an artistic director. I think that in classical music circles, it has not been the norm. But in early music, which is what we do, so, early Western European music mostly, with lots of additions over the past 15 years or so of different repertoires from different places. He was always very collaborative, so he set us up, for example, that some of us individuals would occasionally be AD on a show. So people got practice at doing that, and that is something that we are continuing now, that the people who have not been involved in artistic direction before are welcome to join in, and they usually join in by helping somebody who's an AD on a show right now. Anyway, David was always encouraging that way, and also the way he led was very collaborative. So, everybody got to put in their 2 cents worth. And so that was really, we were kind of used to that way of working. And then when he announced that he was leaving, after we got over the shock, but of course, it's kind of silly. One thing I think people have to do is really be willing to think about the unthinkable that they don't want to see happen, but it's going to happen. This happens. People go, and they have a right to go at any time. And when they leave because they've got other things they're interested in doing and they feel they've put in everything they can do for the organization, that is also hugely to be respected and appreciated and to be grateful for, right? Anyway, when this was announced to us, we thought about it. And I think at the point the board was wondering about, well, should we put out a search for an artistic director? But the combination of the type of music that we do being a relatively small niche type of music, you don't have a lot of people to choose from. And we kind of thought as a group of musicians that, well, we have been doing this occasional directing ourselves. So why don't we see if rather than doing a search and bringing in somebody from the outside, because it was actually pretty hard to think of bringing in somebody from the outside, also somebody to move to Toronto in terms of how much it costs to live here and the salary, which is not huge, as any musician and anybody in the arts knows. Working artists don't make a lot of money, so how can you bring in somebody to live in Toronto when they can't afford the rent? Anyway, so we decided to go with this artistic associates model. So we decided let's do it like a circle. Let's do it like a bunch of colleagues as we are, and let's see how that goes. And then we had just started to get used to that, and then the pandemic hit. And I have to say, it's been a big journey. I'm sure it has for everybody else. Just you decide individually and also as a group, you have to look very seriously at why do you do this? What makes you want to do this? Do you still want to do this? If so, why and how? And what can we also learn from this big upheaval? It shows us a lot of things as well as disturbing us, but there's a lot to be learned about ourselves and as ourselves as a group as well. So yeah, so that's
a really amazing journey, Allison. I think what speaks to me about that is that those values of collaboration and the collectiveness and the holistic approach is intrinsically part of your organizational culture and your values, and you're living up to those, and that's how you're able to navigate such a big change, and also to navigate through the pandemic, where some, I mean, it's still uncertain right now whether we'll recover, but I feel like you have things in place to mitigate those risks as you move ahead. And I do like how you speak about that artistic model of governance, which is not always the case in terms of in other organizations where it's a little bit more hierarchical, or
Right.
there is one leader in one or two leaders at the top. So and maybe this question is for Heather, is now you're also engaging in a new managing director search, and also the evolution of your organization as well as your board. How does the learning from that transition with David and translate into your current succession and transition at the organization?
Allison made an excellent point around the distinction between contingency, when someone leaves abruptly for whatever reason, health or otherwise, and true succession planning, where you have a collection of individuals who are talented, who are ready to step up or willing to assume additional responsibility. And throughout my tenure on the board, and then most recently in the last few years on the executive, that's been one of the hallmarks of the organization. I've served on many boards in my career, and as have a lot of our directors. And this is the first foray for all of us into a collective. It's really quite distinctive from most any not-for-profit charitable organizations. Ultimately, decisions still have to be made. When you look at legal documents, the president or the secretary, the treasurer's name still appears on them, as we do know with banking documents, which seem to go on forever. But I must say that, this period of BC before COVID, and then what we're coming through afterwards, has really been the test of the merit and the value of the system that we have and our real DNA. And I would offer too that most organizations who weren't well positioned coming into this period are probably not around now, or are having real difficulty on top of what we all share, which are challenges having our audiences, our communities return to live performances. I am speaking to you from South Carolina, and I had the pleasure of attending very well-known jazz trumpeter concert the other night in Savannah, and it was really discouraging to see so many empty seats. This is a gentleman who's won 7 Grammy Awards, 2 Academy Awards, Terrence Blanchard. Now, he put on a fabulous concert, and those who are there to share in that feeling, and the tremendous artists that he was also featuring, a quartet called the Turtle Island Quartet, I highly recommend them, was an experience like no other. And I thought, if we aren't well positioned as a governance team to maintain and sustain things like that Savannah Music Festival or the Toronto Concert, or hundreds, thousands of us across North America and across the world, what is our worth? And so through this period of naturally transitioning into new operational leadership, we wanted to maintain this habit, this ingrained habit of reaching out to our community to ask and have a very transparent period of what would you like to see in this new position as we reemerge into live performances? What is the most important to you as a community to see in leadership? And so while this may lengthen what might typically be a 3 or 4 month period of a recruitment process, it's worth it ultimately in that we've done the consultation, we continue to live the values of the organization, and we make sure that we create spaces and policies around those spaces to ensure that that consultation is heard and acted upon. Certainly, as we look at recruitment, retention, it's all along a continuum, right? We hope to keep people. If we can't, then we celebrate where they're going to go next. Allison referred to our repertoire as being pretty unique, music that happened before we knew how to recognize instruments and notes on a score. We're a pretty narrow kind of community who appreciates the music, and we're all looking as all performing arts groups are, to expand that community of interest, to rejuvenate our audience, and to use music as a real metaphor for engaging and changing, making the change happen that is so important for our communities. Those who are outside of music and inside of it, vibrant again coming out of this period.
That's really, really great. To me, it sounds like, you have the things in place within your organization, and then you're moving and adapting as you go along. And that everyone involved, whether it's, the musicians or the, artistic advisory, or even the board, is continuously learning to support the work that you're trying to do, which is really, really great. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to invite Ted and Christina onto the screen to speak about Generator. Hello, Ted and Christina.
Hello.
So Generator has a long history of reimagining staffing and governance structures already. And as you've heard, both the organizations that previously spoke, we're also reimagining what it can mean for their organization. So this reimagining coincides with leadership transitions as well. Would you be able to share a brief context for this transition and what important steps were taken specifically at Generator? There's lots of changes happening there and continue to happen.
Like thinking about this, we sort of talked about that it's sort of necessary to talk about all the transitions that led to where we are now, which is that in 2015, 2016, Michael Wheeler was brought into the organization, which at the time was called Staff and had a completely different business model. So when Michael applied for the job, he actually applied for an executive director job of the previous organization and said, I'll take this job, but I'm going to change everything. And to a testament to Generator's board, which I think stays to the board to this day, it has a very high risk tolerance, which is something that is sometimes unusual to see in a board. So they said yes to Michael coming in and working with the community and the funders to completely transform the business model of an organization. He was there about 2 years and sort of did the work to get permission to do the change. And then I had been working with him on a research project from Vancouver where I was located. And when he left, he was like, you'll have to apply, but we want to pull you in and pull the research we've been doing together into this organization. So I moved from Vancouver to Toronto to take this job, which I was in, I think, like 4 or 5 years, something. The transitions are murky. When am I not? When am I? I'm not sure. So, when I decided to leave, speaking of, they were talking about transitions, it was about a 12 to 16 month transition from when I gave the notice to my board to when I again, it's remained murky, but was sort of more fully out. And in that time was also during the pandemic. So we were really considering I wanted to move on in my career, but what was needed
everything that was
within the
Sorry, Christina, can I just stop you for a second?
Feel free to take some minutes back. But if you want to chat, discuss, etc., hang out, stay here.
I'm just going to ask everyone to ensure that they're on mute.
Those two, Steph. I'm part of a big.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so in the when I left into the transition of Michael Caldwell, we were it was just a question, because also as an organization that's purpose was to train individuals how to produce live theater, we were making this transition in a time in which live theater wasn't permitted. So and I think there remains questions about what live performance looks like now, or what the needs are of producing live work in the state that we're in now. So the transition remains open because, again, the organization is curious about how to be responsive to what the community needs.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think as you both cited, that radical change is something that's been in Generator's DNA, I think, at least for the last 8 years. And so we were really open at the time I was board chair. And we had some conversations once Christina gave notice that involved Christina and the rest of the staff as well, in terms of, okay, if we're going to put everything up for grabs, well, everything could go up for grabs, but what actually do we want to put up for grabs in this transition? So we asked ourselves everything from, like, who do we want to be serving? How do we want to be serving them? What kind of a model do we want to be operating under? And I think, we landed on this idea of continuing to build the capacity of independent artists to produce their own work. That still felt like core to who we were, and that was the one thing we wanted to stick with as we were navigating the change. But for us, everything else was on the table. I think something that Christina really brought in as an organizational value, and that we wanted to carry into the transition, was the idea of training and artistic practice being one size fits one. And so we knew in reinventing the organization that whatever new leadership model was going to come in, it would have to be built around the skills and capacities of whoever that new leader or leaders were. And we wanted to be really open to allowing people to imagine a way of organizing the administration and execution of Generator's mission, as long as we stuck on mission. It was also really important for us to include that community and to include the people that Generator serves in the transition. So we did that in a couple ways, reaching out through the Generator Generations, which are previous graduates of our training programs, and also by specifically engaging and paying community members to be part of a strategic advisory in terms of imagining what a future for the organization would look like. The board the board is a small but mighty and now mighty tired force. We're mighty tired. But it was clear to us, one, that our volunteer capacity did not stretch to the full scope of the reimagining that we were open to. And also that if we were going to be working with community members, it's another thing that's been part of Generator's ethic all along, is if we're working with artist producers, they need to be paid for their time and labor. And so we set up a paid strategic advisory that met, I think it was kind of 8 meetings over the course of that year, and some of them were actually pulled onto the hiring committee, and that was part of their work. They took on different teams and projects as a group, and broke it into sub teams, and a portion of them sat on the hiring committee. I think I was actually the only board member on the hiring committee. I think in the end it was mostly community members, and Christina was with us through that process as well.
That's really, really great. I think what I like about what's speaking to me is around, that whenever there's transition, it's always an opportunity to figure out what is next. We don't have to revert back to what has always been done, and really asking those critical questions of ourselves. I love that you brought up around high risk tolerance, and that what that tells me is that there's huge appetite for change, and that what that does is actually move our organizations forward when we have an appetite for change, and to be able to have those conversations within the organization as well as in the community. So Generator's most recent hiring calls have been carefully planned and are quite thorough, especially in terms of outreach and accessibility. Could you speak briefly about what was involved in these hiring processes and the key learnings for the organization?
Sure. Well, I mean, TBQH, like a big point of origin of the hiring process that we designed was Christina and I met because I was in an executive hiring process myself, and it was a crap process. Um, and we sort of bonded, and like we had known each other in the sector, but we really started to spend time together around that period, and had a lot of shared negative experiences of executive hiring processes in the arts sector. And so a lot of that process is reactionary. It was a lot of trying to solve pain points that we had experienced or that others in our networks had experienced. anything from not being provided with enough info up front. Like a wild amount of work goes into these executive hiring processes, which is often unpaid. And then you're just like, there goes your intellectual property. And they're often quite inaccessible or built around terms that the board that serve the board more than the leaders that you're trying to attract. You often end up in front of a panel that has like little to no community input or representation. And there's also not enough touch points to get to know what the organization or communities that that organization serves values. So those were a lot of the things that went into that process. I'll pass it over to Christina to keep going on this one.
Yeah, I think the other piece of that is that, a generator does a lot for very little money. And so in the putting out the call, especially that led to Michael Caldwell's hire, because we were open, like basically the entire team was ready to go around that time. So there was a real opportunity to completely restructure. And so we wanted people to have a real, we were like, you need to understand how much money there is actually though, because there's not enough money for 2 full-time salaries of folks to live in Toronto. So a lot of what it went into it too is just to really give people the information that they would need to be able to consider whether or not they want it, whether or not there are the resources to make their restructuring dreams come true.
That's really great, Ted. Thank you for acknowledging that some search processes are absolutely horrible. And that it's awful for the candidate, honestly. And I think that's something that organizations absolutely need to look at when they're planning their process. We need to be respectful of each other's time, of our thoughts, of what we bring forward to the table. And sometimes there is a weird power dynamic there that is not actually necessary. And I can say I recently went through a process with Christina and her team, and it was amazing. And I've taken so much of that learning into what I'm doing now at the School of Toronto Dance Theatre and hopefully into the future. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for bringing that up. That's really, really wonderful. Sorry, go ahead, Ted.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, another thing that felt important to us, and that like we were maybe we were only surprised by this because of how tired we were, like in just like constructing the call and putting it out there. But like Generator, another value that Generator has is making sure that its work is like a learning opportunity for the sector, for the community. So we were surprised that the call went like mini viral in the like arts leadership niche sector, like the progressive arts leadership niche sector. It did go around. We had a few opportunities to talk about it. But it was also really important to us that work be publicly available and be available to be emulated, reproduced. We invited, like, just please plagiarize that process because we heard it was less crappy for many of the people who went through it. But then, like, the flip side of that is that, we wanted it to be a real learning opportunity, but where we come up against capacity as well is something we were just chatting about in prepping for this conversation, that the organization is still at a place, and because of the funding structures that we're working within, where we couldn't as fulsomely communicate the learnings around it as we would have liked, and we may be able to find the capacity for that down the road. But because it's such a small, agile organization, there's really a lot to be reckoned with in terms of what we can humanely ask the humans who work with us to put out into the world.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really wonderful. I'm going to ask the speakers to all come on screen just before we head into the breakout room, so I can just chat with everyone quickly and maybe offer the space if there's anything else you'd like to add. But for me, my favorite bits are around, the support circles. I think that's amazing. So many times I've gone into a role and you arrive and you're like, okay, do what you're supposed to be doing. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, And so that support is really, really great. I love the proactive and the holistic approach of all these organizations, and the community consultation part of bringing in different people to help with planning, to execute, and to ensure that our organizations can really transition and build for the future. So that's really, really wonderful. Is there anybody here that on screen that wants to just add any final words before we go into the breakout rooms? Think about it, think about it. Okay, well, there's more opportunity to chat with the group. So so now we're going to go out into breakout rooms, and Alexandra is going to pop that up shortly. What most about the topic today is just everything that we've discussed really aligns with all the things that we were trying to bring forward through the Creative Champions Network and our partnership with Generator over the last 8 months. Really, it's about an arts ecosystem with good governance, importance of having good organizational culture so that we're making good decisions together. This is about spending time on planning and having a holistic approach to all the work that we do. I know board recruitment is a crazy hot topic, and we didn't cover that today, but definitely the tactics and approaches that were brought forward by these 3 groups are useful and can be brought forward to inform your board recruitment process. Alexandra is going to be sending out a survey, so please let us know your thoughts or other topics that you would like to have included in the future. In the survey, you can also include questions, and I'm happy to get the team to answer them as well if you have further questions or need other resources. I hope that you will join our next session in June. An email has already gone out for the save the date, but you'll get more information as we approach that date. This is going to be a social gathering with potentially a keynote speaker. So please join us so that you can come and meet other arts volunteers and leaders. And who knows, maybe you'll meet a new board member or 2 for your own organization. I want to thank Ted, Christina, Allison, Heather, Joelle, and Himanshu for sharing your succession and transition journeys with us. Thank you to Michael and Bianca for helping us co-host today. And I want to thank everyone who's attended, all our sponsors and our donors as well, who make these sessions possible. And of course, thank you to the team at the Toronto Arts Foundation behind the scenes, making all of the things come together for all of us. Thank you and have a great day.